Welcome to Easing Racial Tensions in the Workplace, sponsored by NAIA, NAIFA, and New York Life. This is Brendan Burnett, NAIFA's Director of Professional Development and Education Programs, and with me today is Margaret Redd, a thought leader with vision and a dedicated focus on excellence. Margaret Redd specializes in helping organizations to achieve and exceed profit and growth objectives by optimizing distribution platforms, organizational resources, and best practices. She is an accomplished executive and proven leader with a diversified background in all lines of property and casualty insurance, working with multiple distribution channels. Currently, Margaret is the National Executive Director of NAIA, and she is the second individual to hold that position for the esteemed organization. She is a founder of NAIA's first chapter, NAIA Chicago, and served as VP and then president for more than 7 years. And Keith McLean. Keith McLean is an inspired and transformational leader. He currently serves as vice president and head of compensation for New York Life. His responsibilities include executive and broad-based compensation program design, policy and administration, and providing strategic guidance on compensation matters across the enterprise. During the webinar today, you may type your questions in the question box on the right side of your screen. Questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. This presentation is being recorded. Margaret, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you, Brendan. And on behalf of the NAIA National Board, our event partners, New York Life and NAIFA, I again want to welcome all of you on the phone today. And thank you for joining us for this session. And this is the second session of this year's National Black History Month events. Our audience, and I think it looks like now we're just around 30 people or so, but our intended audience is just around 100 participants. It's made up of members and supporters from across the country. We're pleased to note that some of you on the phone may not have had exposure to NAIA before now, so I'd like to share just a few significant highlights about the organization. NAIA was chartered 21 years ago by our founder, Gerald L. Tillman. The national organization is led and governed by a national board. NAIA's footprint is in each region of the country, where we have 15 local chapters, more than 400 members across 25 states and growing. NAIA's base of supporters exceed over 2,000, and our partner base is represented by the best of national and regional carriers and brokers, independent agents, and other industry organizations. NAIA's mission, now as it was 21 years ago, is to increase the numbers of African American insurance professionals nationwide. With that, NAIA is committed and intentional in our efforts to provide relevant, game-changing support and programming to a base that is shaped by a broad cross-section of industry professionals, including agents and non-agents, new entrants, emerging leaders, C-suite executives, CEOs, and business owners. You are encouraged to visit our website, naia.org, or contact us at naia.office@gmail.com for additional information. The topic today, easing racial tensions at work, is very relevant, with many of us often experiencing the backlash and impact on our business, professional, and personal lives. Therefore, as an organization that is focused on empowering our members and supporters with information and resources, which enhances one's ability to effectively navigate the career journey, it is incumbent upon NAIA to be the force to introduce and lead discussions like the one that we're having. In 2017, the Center for Talent Innovation, or CTI, released the study, Easing Racial Tensions at Work. NAIA partner, New York Life, was a lead sponsor and advisor of that work. I would like to take this opportunity to share a few of the key findings from the CTI study. Advance to the first slide, please. Race relations affect employees. And how is that possible? The study confirmed that external tensions spill into the workplace. In response to the question of employees who have experienced discrimination, bias outside of work, and are fearful of discrimination or bias or violence for themselves or their families, the facts are that 78% of Blacks, 28% of whites, 52% of Asians, 50% of Latinos all responded positively that they have experienced discriminations or they have fear of discrimination for their families. In fact, a Black female from a focus group responded, "I cannot check being a Black woman at the door when entering the workplace. These social issues impact me. I have a young son, and how he engages with the police is a real concern, one that carries over into my morale and my productivity at work." Next slide. Many employees feel they can't discuss racial bias at work, and that is evidenced as having some significant impact in the workplace. So to the question of, is it ever acceptable? And so there's a block here that says, it is never acceptable at my company to speak out about experiences of bias or based on race. 38% of Blacks responded that that is the case, 28% white, 36% Black and Asian, and 28% Latino. This feeling of not being able to express themselves only heightens alienation. So if you look at this the graph in the middle of the page there, employees who regularly feel isolated and or alienated at work, those employees who feel they can that it is never acceptable at their companies to speak out about experiences of bias. 35% of the Black employees who feel that that is never acceptable, they also feel isolated and alienated at work. But when those same employees, or when the Black employees feel that it is acceptable at their company to speak out about experiences of bias and based on race, only 16% of those same employees feel isolated or alienated at work. So you can see that it does make a difference when employees feel that they can express themselves about racial bias. It does have some impact in terms of their sense of feeling isolated or alienated at work. And then at the bottom of this slide, it indicates that Black employees who say it is never acceptable at their companies to speak out about experiences of racial bias, are nearly 3 times as likely to intend to leave their companies within a year. They're 13 times as likely to disengage. And they're more than 3 times as likely to feel they can't bring their whole selves to work. So obviously, there would be some significant impact in terms of productivity within the workplace. Next slide. Talking about race at work benefits the business. This particular slide is important because it shows you the difference between when an employee feels comfortable discussing race relations at work and how that affects other key factors at work, and then the alternate. So when an employee is currently comfortable discussing race relations at work, 76% of those employees feel free to express their views and opinions. 75% of those employees feel welcome and included within their teams. 70% of those employees feel their ideas are heard and recognized. You can see that those percentages decrease substantially when the person is not comfortable discussing race relations at work. In terms of their feeling free to express their views, that number drops from 76 to 56%. In terms of feeling welcome and included within their team, that number decreases from 75% to 62%. And in terms of feeling that their ideas are heard and recognized, that percentage decreases from 70% to 47%. When companies address race publicly, the brand benefits. If you look at the bottom of this particular slide, among respondents who are aware of their companies responding to societal incidents of racial discrimination or bias, the majority say the response made them view the company in a more positive way. That translates into 77% of the Blacks, 65% of the whites, 83% of the Asians, and 67% of the Latino respondees. Next slide. Employers can help employees feel comfortable. Certain circumstances would make employees more comfortable discussing race relations at work. In fact, you see over at the right-hand side of this slide, there's a quote from a white female focus group participant, which basically indicates, "I think senior leaders should model how to talk about race. They can set the example." This particular slide shows that when it comes to discussing race relations at work, it makes a significant difference when there are certain circumstances that support those conversations. So these slides and the information that's contained is just a setup for this particular meeting and the conversation that we'll have around easing racial tensions at work. One of the great opportunities that we have this afternoon is the fact that Keith McLean, senior executive from New York Life, is here to present his story, or a segment of his story, by the way, as part of an Up Close and Personal. Now, NAIA introduced the Up Close and Personal segment of the series several years ago, more than 10 years ago. And in this segment, it's more than just having the opportunity to hear from a speaker, a distinguished speaker and leader, but this is an opportunity to hear from a leader who has agreed to be a bit vulnerable, has agreed to step back, take a look at his journey, in the case of Keith, look at his journey and his experience and share with us today in a kind of a group mentoring environment, share with us in a way that would help us to understand how he has navigated his career, share some pearls of wisdom. So this is not about reading a bio or sharing a resume. This really is about delving into experiences or an experience that has helped to shape the career of the speaker and helped him, in this case Keith, to advance his career and also to improve the circumstances within his workplace. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take this opportunity to pass the mic over to our guest speaker of the hour, Keith B. McLean, VP Compensation, New York Life. Keith?
Thank you, Margaret. First of all, thank you and everyone else on the call for the opportunity and the interest in my story. It's always great when people want to hear what you have to say, and so when you have these opportunities, you really have to revel in them. And so I prepared some remarks, but before I even jump into my remarks, I just want to acknowledge, Ted Mathis, our CEO in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at New York Life, because, between Ted and the ODI office, they've done a great job sort of stepping out into the forefront on the issues of race in the workplace, I believe. It was part of your setup. And, to your comment about the brand, I can't speak about the brand broadly, but I can speak about it in my circle. I'm based in the New York metropolitan area, and I know several ranking specific, people in the diversity space, and also executives of color in the New York, New Jersey area. And I've had people unrelated who weren't even present at the event here late 2016 when Ted and ODI sponsored the conversation internal to New York Life around easing racial tensions at the office, who said that's really impressive that the company was willing to sort of step out there. So just wanted to acknowledge the company and also the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, our Chief Diversity Officer, Kathleen Navarro. They've done a great job, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So at the event internal to New York Life, I had the opportunity to share my story, the story of my experience on the morning of the 2016 Dallas sniper shooting. I shared that with about 800 employees, and apparently it resonated with a good number of people. I got a lot of good feedback from employees, either directly with people walking up to me in the halls or the cafeteria, or people sending me emails directly, saying that my story got them to think about something as simple as their morning commute very differently than they would normally think about it. For a lot of people, they were really surprised that something that we all experience and that we would all think that we experience similarly can be so dramatically different in terms of the experience depending on your perspective. So to tell the story, I woke up at 6 a.m. on the morning of July 7th in 2016, and like I do every day, I rolled over and grabbed my iPad from my nightstand, and I started to get news alerts about the sniper shooting in Dallas. As you probably know, 5 police officers were killed and 9 others were injured. Sort of for context and as an aside, I am the oldest son of a retired Pennsylvania state trooper. So I'm a cop's son. So I do pay close attention to things and have, I experience issues related to police and the sort of the interaction between police and the Black community through that lens. So I started to get those alerts, and I started to read about the story that was still unfolding, and it happened overnight. And I didn't know all the specifics at the time. I just knew that some cops had been killed, and I was praying, quite frankly and quite honestly, that the shooter was not Black for a lot of reasons. He was, and but I didn't know that at the time. So I looked over at my sleeping wife and my 4-year-old daughter, who had recently connived her way into our bed, and it took us almost a year, by the way, to get her out of our bed. And as I looked at them lying there, I was paralyzed. I was afraid to go to work, and this is something like all of you on the phone that I do every day. You see, I commute into Manhattan every morning by bus, and every morning I stroll by dozens of heavily armed and armored police officers and National Guards people, oftentimes carrying semi-automatic rifles. And to be honest with all of you, I find that unnerving on a regular day. But this wasn't a regular day. And even though I knew that they weren't really there for me, I found no comfort in heavily armed police, and I don't find comfort in heavily armed police in general. The image simply evokes very difficult feelings for me to manage and to reconcile. But that day, several of their brothers in arms, so to speak, were killed or injured by the sniper. I mean, how scared must those folks have been on that day? And scared cops have historically not been very good for the health and well-being of folks who look like me. So for a few seconds there, I was terrified, and I sat there thinking, New York Life might need me today, but my wife and baby girl need me more. And I was afraid to go to work because I was afraid of the police. And more accurately, I was afraid of the potential mindset that the police might be in light of what was happening. So however unlikely you might think it is that something would happen, that something might jump off, for lack of a better way of saying it, it only takes one cop to be in the wrong state of mind for it all to go wrong for someone like me or anyone, but particularly someone like me in that case. And that was a really bad day, especially for cops. Well, I eventually composed myself and kind of processed what was going on in the world and in my mind and in my heart. My wife, providing some wisdom and the calming effect that she tends to have on me. And I got myself dressed and I went to work, nervously making my way through the Port Authority bus terminal, past dozens of heavily armed and heavily armored police and National Guardsmen and Guardswomen. And I was pretty relieved when I finally got out of there and into a cab. And once I arrived at the office, to no real surprise, no one was really talking about what was going on. And as details surfaced throughout the day, we all found out that the shooting was racially motivated and the shooter was Black. And for me, this was the incident that I had been dreading. I'm distracted, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm confused. I didn't know what to do with that information. And as a relatively senior contributor here at the company, that was pretty obvious. I was wearing it externally. I was scared about what was going on in society. I was scared about what was going on and confused about and wondering about what was going on in the hearts and minds of my work friends and my colleagues, my subordinates, my superiors, and nobody was talking about it. Where were they in their heads, and how should I handle that? So I started talking. I started talking about it. I talked about it with junior people. I talked about it with peers. I talked about it with people who were senior to me. I kind of, in an appropriate way, in a diplomatic way, I kind of forced the issue. I talked about it with Black people. I talked about it with non-Black people. I needed to know that for my own peace of mind so I could move on and start to, move past the issue. So I set out to try to get to know and understand the landscape of what I was dealing with and who I was dealing with. Some people agreed when I talked to them. Some people didn't. Some people felt comfortable talking about it and sharing their thoughts. A lot of people didn't. But at least I didn't have to wonder quite as much anymore. So to me, starting to talk about it and the knowledge that I was able to gain as I talked to folks was really valuable. And selfishly, talking about it was really cathartic because all of those anxieties and all of those feelings were pent up. And I was walking around with this knot in my chest, wondering what this meant for everyone, what this meant for society, and also what this meant for me. As a matter of principle, I try very hard not to suppress issues that might weigh down my mind. In my mind, covering, in quotes, made famous by Kenji Yoshino, or covering up your true self to fit in with the mainstream. I'm an East Coast guy, so I like to call it putting up a front, creates noise and introduces sort of junk into the system. They, whoever they are, just don't get me. They just won't understand. They just don't care. I don't think that we should allow these tensions and anxieties to distract our focus from what's truly important. Don't take these burdens on yourself, or at least don't take them on yourself alone. The noise interferes with your ability to be your best self. It creates another obstacle that you need to overcome on your way toward achieving your goals or advancing your agenda. Fronting is, to an extent, a self-imposed obstacle, at least in my opinion. And we all have so many obstacles that are imposed upon us. Why impose more on ourselves? At least that's what I like to think, and how I try to manage my life and my career. Like most people, I have a very noisy mind filled with worries and anxieties and fears, so I have to work really hard to keep it calm and keep my mind quiet. So you might be wondering, how's that different than anyone else's challenges? And I'm not sure it is very different. Everyone spends a lot of time and mental energies worrying about how they will be perceived. That's just a fact of life. The question is how much of that worry relates specifically to race and ethnicity, and for me, it's always been a lot. I have to be very aware of my Blackness at all times, and that is something that not everyone has to worry about. I mean, everyone has their worries, but not everyone has to worry about those things quite as much. And just as an aside, I'm also very fully aware there are things that I don't have to worry about that other people do have to worry about. But my Blackness, while not unique to me, is not something that everyone else has to deal with at all times. Other folks can kind of keep their eyes on their prize. And in this competitive labor market, the ability to focus can be the difference between winning and losing. So in my view, whatever noise you can eliminate from your mind and from your day, you should take steps to do that. So in terms of how to go about alleviating the noise, I think you first start with yourself. I mean, I think you achieve and establish your own individual excellence. You probably heard this all before, but it's true. Being excellent at what you do, it creates a platform and is an enabler for whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Excellence is power. Excellence in your performance, excellence in your contributions. It gives credibility to your words and actions. All people value the words of strong performers and value contributors. For example, and I'm sure many of you are aware, LeBron James got into a bit of a back and forth on social media with Fox News because he refused to shut up and dribble. Of course, he continues to speak his mind, but what makes a person like LeBron so scary is that people listen to him. And it's not because he's some statesperson or high intellectual. Not saying that LeBron James isn't a very intelligent man, he clearly is. But people listen to him because he is the very best, the absolute best at something that's really important to people. And you can tell that he has power by how aggressively Fox News and Laura Ingraham tried to discredit him and to shut him up. Now, of course, he's going to keep speaking. But LeBron's excellence at basketball is his platform, and he leverages it. And I'm proud of him for doing it. So be excellent in your own space, and people will listen. So moving beyond the individual, I would encourage you to find and engage allies at work. There is strength in numbers. Establish and grow your voice and grow your platform by leveraging the strength of those who feel like you do. For example, ERGs and ERG allies. I believe ERGs can be a really, really powerful platform for organizational change. They are a company-sponsored and company-sanctioned group. There's some official power and voice there associated with ERGs. Leverage the ERGs and the official voice that they provide. As it relates to your allies and your sponsors, I believe that most people truly want to view themselves as being on the right and good side of these issues of race, both in the workplace and in society at large. And if they don't, that's a much bigger and different issue. So assuming that your allies and sponsors do want to be on the right side of these issues, appeal to that right-minded side of them. Show them how they can work with you and contribute. Provide some specific and tangible and actionable ways that they can help. Make it easy for them to help you advance your agenda. There will be significant moral and psychological benefits to them, just being on the right side of these very sensitive issues. So there's something in it for them to help you. So actively and strategically apply pressure. Don't be afraid to apply a little appropriate and healthy pressure to existing allies and sponsors, or to sympathetic people who are potentially strategically placed in terms of power and access and influence. If you have people like myself who happen to have access or who are in key roles, not to say that I'm in such a key role, but I do have a little bit of access here at New York Life. If they are sympathetic to what it is that you're trying to advance in terms of agenda, don't be afraid to apply some pressure and ask them to actually do something about it. Selfishly, when you're applying the pressure, you're doing something, you're advancing your agenda. And in a way that feels good, and it relieves some of the pressure that you might be feeling internally. And on the other hand, when you let allies and sponsors off the hook, so to speak, when you don't actually get them to help you in any sort of real way advance your agenda, they still win, in a way, psychologically and morally, by simply being associated with you and what it is you're trying to do, because they are on the right side of the issue. But they didn't actually do anything, and you missed the opportunity to leverage those relationships to further your agenda. So don't be afraid to apply a little bit of pressure. Keep it appropriate, keep it diplomatic, but don't let people off the hook. If we want to make change in the workplace and in society, you have to do something. And that's for the affected peoples as well as those who view themselves as allies as well. Lastly, I think that we all need to think broadly when it comes to our roles in our careers. The employment relationship is just like any other relationship. I like to say you can't make somebody love you. That love must come from within that person, or in this case, within that organization. Your real leverage and your real power comes from your ability and your willingness to walk away. And going back to my earlier comments, if you're excellent, someone else will be happy to add you to their team. If you're excellent, you'll have options. And if you have options, you have power. And so as a byproduct, when you feel less trapped because you have options, you tend to view your current situation more optimistically. So find your optimism either where you are now or somewhere else. Too often, I think people spend too much time trying to bend other people to their will, to try to make others see what they see, to try to make other people see what they see, how they see it. And sometimes that's just not going to happen. I believe if you're willing and able to walk away, you'll be able to see your situation more clearly, and you'll feel more empowered, and you'll discover your sense of self-determination. And when you're self-determined, you can begin to plot your own path. And at least in my view, once you can plot your own path, you've already won. So that's actually the end of my prepared remarks. And I'm hoping that we have some questions, and I'm happy to take any questions that the group may have.
Thank you, Keith, for sharing that. And I also want to remind our attendees that if you'd like to ask a question, you may type your question in the question box on the right side of your screen. I have a question for Keith. Could you please drill down a bit on the acronym ERGs and how that's significant, please?
Oh, I apologize. ERGs are employee resource groups. They are groups of employees generally sponsored or sanctioned by companies, corporations, and they provide sort of an opportunity or a platform for people who have a shared identity or affinity around a group, an ethnic group, or otherwise, to sort of share ideas and put on programs and just create a sort of shared experience for people in the organization who have shared interests. Certainly there's an African American ERG here at New York Life, but there's also one, Enable, that is an organization that focuses on people with disabilities. We have the Pride Group, which focuses on the LGBT or employee subset. There's the Women's Initiative, which is a women's group. There's the Asian ERG as well as the Latino ERG. So we have a number of ERGs that are provide sort of a platform, a resource, and a safe space for people who want to find like-minded people who identify around similar issues or identities, and that's what they are. It's a very, very powerful organizational tool.
Keith, this is Margaret. Would you comment on, again, on the same topic, on the impact of that champion, who that champion might be, the difference, the status of that champion in terms of that impact on the ERG's effectiveness and their ability to attain their agenda?
Specifically at New York Life or just in general?
Just in general, and then any pertinent facts you can share from New York Life, but I was thinking more in general. Okay,
in general. At least in my view, we happen to have a very, I will start with New York Life because we have a very, very strong, we have people at the very top of the organization who are very interested in our ERGs and who take a very active role. But the champions, one, are, at least in my experience, very, very senior people. The champions here sit on the executive committee, so they're, you're talking about folks who are among the top 10 or 12 people in the organization. And so they bring an element of wisdom in terms of helping to shape and guide the ERGs as they set their agenda. And they also provide a ton of access to the CEO, sometimes even to the board of directors. We have a very sympathetic and invested and interested CEO. So we are very fortunate in that. But part of the, one of the ways that Ted got to where he is the fact that he has a very trusted advisor in George Nichols, who heads up governmental affairs at New York Life, and who's also the champion for the African American ERG. He also happens to be the ranking Black executive here at New York Life. And so between having the horsepower that George brings to the table and a very, in the horsepower, obviously, that Ted Mathis brings to the table. We had a real platform to go out and do the things that Kathleen Navarro, ODI, and others were trying to push in terms of discussing and dealing with racial tensions here in the workplace and sort of in the broader world. But George brings wisdom. He brings access. He brings sort of a discerning sort of mind. When he brings the ability to sort of think about this in a broader context. So he brings sort of perspective. He understands what's going on more broadly in the organization and how to best position things that the ERG may want to do. He understands how that fits into kind of what we're doing more broadly as an organization to give us the best view to design a sales pitch to pitch whatever it is that we're trying to do, if that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So I think that, whether it's someone like George Nichols, who has he's been very active in the ERG since the beginning, or some of the other folks who are champions and sponsors for other ERGs or other ERG initiatives, I think what's really important is, as I mentioned, to put the pressure on them appropriately. You don't want to turn people off, but appropriately, to kind of move the ball forward, to use a sports analogy, on whatever it is that you're trying to do or whatever issue it is that you're trying to work through within your workplace.
Thank you.
And we have quite a few. We have a lot of questions, actually. The first one, I'm not Black, but I'm somewhat of a minority. Like a lot of people, I know what is right. I want to be supportive, but what do I do when someone starts talking and I don't agree with them? For example, I believe in protesting, but not on company time. Thus, the conversation doesn't go any further. And to distill this question, it almost sounds like a question that was on my mind, which is, what are the characteristics of a good ally, a helpful ally, as opposed to an unhelpful ally? So I'll throw this out to the panel.
Well, I mean, I think that the characteristics of a good ally is anyone, at least this is just my view. I can't speak for anyone else at New York Life or anyone else even in my own life, but a characteristic of a good ally is someone who is interested in helping you move forward, whatever it is you're trying to move forward. I think that the question of what is appropriate to be done on company time versus not is actually really important question. My view is probably not too dissimilar from that person who asked the question, is that there's a time and a place for everything. And you have to, if you have alignment from management and it's something that the company wants to address and the company thinks that is a function or is an issue that is important to address for the company or for its employee base, and you have so if you have alignment from management to address something on company time, I think that is certainly very appropriate. If there's not alignment, then it may not be appropriate. But I think that's why you need to work with your allies, work with your sponsors and your champions to line up management, bringing it back to New York Life. And I bring it back to New York Life, not just because I work here, but because I believe the company did a really good job with its race in the workplace initiatives. That was sanctioned from the very top of the organization. So the ERG and the Office of Diversity and Inclusion worked with George Nichols, worked through Ted Mathis and his office to get alignment on the messaging, the posturing, and sort of the tone that they wanted to set for New York Life. And they came up with something that worked not only for the ERG and the broader African-American, and not just African-American, the broader employee base. where people felt like, that they found a way to strike a balance between addressing the issues directly that affect not only African Americans, but everybody, where everyone felt like they had an opportunity to contribute and be heard. And so it was an inclusive, tone and posturing that they were able to, and balance that they were able to strike in a way that was appropriate for the workplace. So it was, I think we did a really good job here at the company, and hopefully we'll be able to keep that momentum going. But allies are anyone that's right-minded. Just because an ally, someone wants to be an ally doesn't mean they're going to agree with everything that the ERG wants to do. But an ally can be someone that you can just bounce off ideas and who's willing to offer sort of a contrarian view to help you develop your ideas and your programs and your agenda. So I think there are allies that get right behind you and help sort of add to the momentum on whatever it is that you're trying to do. And those are good allies. And there are also allies who are there to kind of play the devil's advocate and play the opposing role to make sure that your ideas and your cases are sharp. Both are very, very valuable. So I would encourage the person who asked a question to stay engaged and to do what they feel is the right thing to do.
And Brandon, before you move on to the next question, I had a text from one of the attendees indicating that they were having a problem with the sound. Is there a way for us to discern if everybody's kind of still on and able to hear the conversation?
Well, I'm sorry that attendee is having difficulty. We do have still a full set of attendees engaged on the webinar, so it would seem that that's not a global problem.
Okay. Thank you.
However, I invite that attendee to disconnect their audio and reconnect via the phone using the phone number provided when they registered. When they joined the webinar to reconnect.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And our next question, how can I help ease racial tensions in my workplace or my circles? What is the best way to initiate the conversation or appropriately address these both horizontally and vertically in the workplace? And then a second question, somewhat related, how do you begin the conversation when you're the only person of color in the room? And I apologize if these questions have been different formats already been asked, but Keith?
Those are tough questions. At least in my view, when you're talking about, laterally or talking to subordinates or to your management, I am a big proponent of direct communication. I think that I would communicate early and often, and but I would be as thoughtful as I can. So I like to personally, when something's on my mind, I don't usually let it stew, and I usually get things that are weighing on my mind off my chest. And the reason why I do that is because I become less reasonable and less articulate the more upset about something I get. So if something's really weighing on me or bothering me, I usually try to address it as directly as I possibly can. So I tend to take a very direct approach. And that works for me. It works for me here in New York Life. And I understand that not everyone is in a situation where they can be as direct. So I would advise folks to, bring it up with your manager. I think bring it up with your manager. Also, you should be able to bring it up with your HR. Or if it's something that's really, really serious, hopefully you have like an employee hotline where you can bring up issues that need like real addressing. But if you're talking about just general issues of racial tensions in the workplace, I would advise that you bring it up with your management even before you start to sort of branch out laterally and dealing with things. Because what you want is you want to give management, whether it's your supervisor or beyond, the opportunity to get on board with you and create that alignment. You don't want to put the company into an awkward or uncomfortable position before the company has an opportunity, or management has an opportunity to kind of figure out what its position is. So my strong recommendation is to, either via your supervisor or via your manager, via your department head, in conjunction with your relationship with your local HR. And if you have a diversity office, leverage that. If you have a diversity liaison, leverage that. If you have an ERG, leverage that. I would strongly recommend that you leverage the resources available to you, but don't, I definitely wouldn't start to engage on these topics without lining up the other people who are sort of stakeholders in that type of issue.
Keith, if I could just add to that, just a thought as well, because you just look at the statistic. We all know that it's not rare or uncommon to be, find yourself to be the only one in the room, or only person of color, or only Black person in the room, right? And in addition to the comments that you shared, I would also say that one of the things I think many of us, one of those skills that we work on honing is being able to read the tea leaves and to be able to read your audience and know the people around you, right? That's part of the bigger job. And so it is also seeking out that like-minded individual that is in a position of influence. That person may not be your manager, it may not be the head of D&I, but it could be someone that's in a position of influence. But it really is trying to, identify with some folk to have an expanded voice around things that, would be major changes or shifts for your organization. But finding some allies within the organization, they may not look like you in terms of color, but from a mindset perspective, maybe have some shared ideas, that there's strength in those numbers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just to add to your comments, Margaret, I would just kind of reiterate that you should do it when you're in the right frame of mind to do it. Because we are talking about a workplace, and there being that you're in the workplace, it does add some variables into the mix that wouldn't otherwise be there. So, when you're in the right mind frame to reach out to these people of influence, as Margaret mentioned, or these allies, these champions, or these officials, make sure that you've sort of thought through what it is that you are trying to deal with, and that you've developed your thinking, and that you can articulate your position, and hopefully a plan forward. You can articulate sort of a way forward. What is it that you're trying to do, or trying to address, and it gives people an opportunity to help the situation, because you've taken the steps necessary to start to begin to formulate a plan. So I totally agree with Margaret, and I think that whether you're the only one in the room or one of the few, that's the way that you should probably approach it, at least in my opinion.
And our next question, can you please speak to leveraging relationships with those who have access to push your agenda, but these individuals may have their own set of challenges, and perhaps your issues are not their priority, at least not immediately?
Right. Well, I mean, I think that we all probably find ourselves in that situation fairly often. And I think that, and I made the comments earlier, when you find someone who is principally aligned with you, even if they are not aligned in terms of the amount of priority they would assign to the issue that you are trying to move forward, what you can do, or what you need to do, is you have to go with provide something tangible. What's the plan? Show them how they can help. Kind of take some of the thought out of it for them, because if you can come to them with a bit of a plan, something actionable, something doable, something tangible, something they can see how they can help. I think that's the best way to do it. You know, it's difficult to come to anyone in any phase of life, particularly in the workplace when we're all very, very distracted with our jobs and our careers and our own agendas, to kind of come with a topic or an idea or a concept with no meat to it and just say, hey, you know, I need your help with this, because these folks, especially a lot of the folks that you're going to be targeting for sponsorship, are going to be extremely busy. And so they're not necessarily the best people you want to brainstorm with, but they may be a really good person for you to react to something that you've already thought through and developed. So this all assumes that they're in the right mind, that they're right-minded people who are aligned with you principally. But if they are, and if they've made themselves available to you as a sponsor or as an ally, bring a plan, not just an idea, bring a plan. And I think you'll get a lot further.
Thank you. Well, that's all the questions that we have today. And we're almost out of time. I have a few more minutes if anyone else would like to get a question in. And at this point, there are no further questions. And so I'd like to turn the webinar back over to Margaret for any closing thoughts.
Brendan, thank you so much for your help and support this afternoon. Keith, on behalf of and by the way, everybody, Brendan is at home recovering from a significant case of the flu, so we get gratitude.
I hope you can't tell.
No, we couldn't. You're a real champion. Thank you so much. And thanks. Keith McLean, we've been working with Keith for well over a year to try to get him in front of our NAIA family to share this particular story in this particular way around this particular topic. And I hope all of you were, thoroughly informed and engaged and are walking away with something that, a little pearl of wisdom that is going to be helpful to you in your career and your businesses. So thank you very much. And of course to NAIFA and New York Life, thank you on behalf of NAIA and our entire membership from around the country. We really appreciate your support and your partnership. This is the kind of thing that really helps us all to be better and to reach that greatness that we all aspire to. So thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us. And again, for those of you who are not members of NAIA, check us out on NAIA.org. Contact us through NAIA@gmail.com and join us. We are anxious to grow, interested in your voice and your perspective. So thank you all very much.
Thanks, Margaret. This concludes the webinar.